acknowledge that the episodes in this series are produced on the traditional unceded lands of the Coast Salish peoples, which includes the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We thank them for allowing us to be their guests.
Well, my friend baked some cookies. We were like 7 or 8 years old, and she wanted to sell the cookies. And I said, I know, if we do a show, we can sell the cookies. So we took a fairy tale, fractured it, made it with puppets, and then got all the neighborhood kids to come, sold all the cookies.
Wow.
And
this was in California?
Yeah, in California. Yeah.
Where in California?
In San Jose, California.
Okay.
And what's interesting about that is we lived in Eichler housing, which is one of the first experiments in integration in the United States. So it was like a totally integrated neighborhood. James Baldwin talks about it in his documentary. So
cool.
Yeah, I didn't think about it at the time, but this friend
you're just a kid.
Is a South Asian and Puerto Rican friend. So she's the one who had the cookies. And then what happened is this mother came and it's like, why are we paying clowns and stuff to perform at children's parties? We should have you perform at children's parties. So I guess I was a little bit older than 6.
Cheaper than those clowns.
That's right. So then I was very entrepreneurial. So I was like, we have to invest in the business. So I bought all these marionettes. Yeah, we wrote and staged and practiced all the shows and came up with things to do with kids at kids' parties. And
that's fantastic.
yeah, I still have the marionettes.
Wow. Yeah. Wow, that's really great. That's...
Yeah. And at that time, for some reason, all the kids decided to get married at the softball stop. All of them, the whole grade 6.
Decided to get married.
They were getting...
in grade 6.
Yeah.
That's an interesting neighborhood that you grew up in.
Yeah, well, it was Silicon Valley. I don't know why. They all decided to get married.
Let's get married,
yeah. So what happened was my 2 friends and I did not want to get married. And one of them said we should become a divorce lawyer because if they're getting married at 12, we can make a lot of money as divorce lawyers.
Yeah, smart kid.
Yeah,
smart kid. Is that kid a divorce lawyer now?
Oh no, you know what? She's actually a singer in Paris.
Okay, so all right, so that was when you were into 12. So okay, and then what happened?
Then I guess I was always interested in it, but it was also that same friend said, it was almost like, check this out, this is cool. So got me to be in my first play where I played a mischievous elf.
So you go right back to the beginning for you. You were just into it from the start, sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Well, those same friends, I think that's why I said 6, because I met that friend at 6, and then we made up radio dramas on cassette tapes.
Wow.
We made up stories together. We just did that all the time. I kind of was like Cecil B. DeMille. My dad had that old computer paper with the lines.
With the tractor paper.
Yeah. And I made costumes out of it and dressed the dog and had big parades.
Wow.
And then my grandmother had a lot of clothes and jewelry or whatever. And she let me wear her gloves and I don't know. I made up pageant things.
That's great.
But yeah, I don't think there wasn't much for us in school.
Yeah.
And my friend's mother was from Puerto Rico, and she worked with young children. So I think maybe, who knows? Unfortunately, she's not with us anymore. But I wonder now how much she kind of created an environment.
Did you guys move around, or what did your dad do? Or your mom, or what did you?
Well, I was actually born in Maryland, and I lived there till I was 6.
Okay.
So. We lived in 15 houses before that because my dad was in grad school.
Oh, okay.
And he was going to grad school in math.
Uh-huh.
Then we lived in San Luis Obispo, and then we lived in San Jose.
Wow.
But then once we lived in San Jose, I grew up there in that Eichler home.
Yeah.
And the education system in California was the worst in the nation at that time because of Reaganomics. So it was on the cover of Newsweek that it had a terrible school system.
Yeah.
So I ended up going to a magnet performing arts high school, which was interesting because for the last 2 years of high school, and because I wanted to perform. But what was hard is that after the first year, they fired all the teachers who were very, we had a teacher from Juilliard, whatever, yeah. And it was weird because what they were doing were busing the white kids in to make a school desegregated.
But anyway, so you went there, nevertheless.
But I'm glad I did, because the rest of my family all went to Catholic school, and they're happy about it. My sister went to a private school. They're happy about it. But, it was rough, But I also am glad I went there because like
Mm.
there was a program for what they called unwed mothers at that time.
Mhm.
And then also there were a lot of kids that were Vietnamese,
Mhm.
a lot of Latinx kids. So I kind of got, I don't really like environments that are elite or all white.
All one color. Yeah.
Yeah, and
exactly, yeah.
and part of maybe where I learned to be more comfortable in a more integrated environment was growing, being part of those experiments. Like I realized later that people ended up very much in enclaves, like the Portuguese community were an enclave, the Chilean community was an enclave,
Mhm.
but I wasn't in an enclave. I was mixed,
Mhm.
like part of these social experiments.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of glad that
That's
I was.
great, actually. But, yeah.
So how about you? Like
Well,
what were...
the first black girl, and the first black student, black girl, came to my homeroom in grade 8. One girl.
Oh, man.
One girl out of 750 students.
Oh,
And the next year there was a second girl. So there was a year younger. So there were 2 black girls. And those girls just, I don't even want to, they had to deal with just tons of stuff, in the washrooms and stuff, and from all the other, particularly from a lot of the other girls, but then what happened for me, and I think what happened for several kids, was, not all kids, but it was like, it was kind of like ho-hum, they're here, so what? We don't care. It's boring being mean to them all the time because we don't really hate them.
Yeah.
They're not, it was sort of like we were doing stuff we'd been taught to do.
Mm.
We were sort of expected to really give these 2 girls a real hard time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went ahead and did what we thought we were supposed to do, And then I went to high school, which was 2,000 students. Big white high school, previously white high school. And there were 12 girls out of 2,000 students. And then I sort of think that except for kind of the real hardline racist kids in school, it was kind of done.
So you almost got sick of the other generation's expectations that something was wrong.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, why do we have to carry this can? This doesn't really relate to me. What I want to do is go to the sock hop with Jane. You had other concerns. You're like a high school student. You're too busy to be. Or you ought to be.
Yeah, I've always been a little bit scared of the southern United States. I haven't really been there.
Yeah.
But because when I was 22, I worked in a domestic violence shelter in New York State.
Right.
And there was a black woman from Florida who was in a mixed race marriage, but like they would burn stuff on her lawn. And,
oh, sure.
It was just so horrific, and since I grew up near San Francisco, or really I feel like I grew up in San Francisco, it's like it's just so different. The mindset is very different.
Take me deeper.
Think further. Okay. Yeah. So then, the Performing Arts High School had a repertory company in residence, San Jose Repertory Company, and James Reber was the executive director, and he had a program where some of us could be interns, so I got to be assistant to an artistic director. So it'd be sort of like the Playhouse, like if you got, here in Vancouver, like you get to be assistant artistic director at 17.
That's great.
And he was like, he taught us to produce. He mentored some of the most amazing leaders in American theater. And I really didn't have any idea kind of that I knew it was an exciting time, but they were all like 10 years older than me. Mm-hmm. So another person, James Houghton, gave me my first professional acting job. I have the pay stub. Like the first check was only $15. But I don't know. I guess I thought there'd be more. There was more.
Oh, hey.
Yeah. But he did like a Reader's Theater play. And James Houghton, if you may or may not know, he founded the Signature Theater in New York.
Yes.
That does like a whole season of a playwright.
Yes, right.
Yeah, and he was the head of the Juilliard's theater division, and he, rest in peace.
Wow,
but
Elaine.
he was there. I know, and then James Bundy was there, who was running Yale, and then Peter Buckley, who was running Del Arte and became a senator. So that's who I was hanging out with. So I didn't really know, but all I knew was like, wow, this is
Yeah.
You know, so I was learning how to do props. I was interested in everything. I
Yeah.
wanted to, you know,
Yeah.
I got to be on headset and run the props table, which was
Yeah.
unbelievably exciting, and
Yeah.
listen to plays over and over. You know how we do? I think that's so good for us. Like to
yes.
hear a play over and over.
Sure. Yeah,
it's a very
yeah,
unusual
yeah.
experience if you think about it, but
Yeah.
as
Because most of the
actors
time you
or-
just read it.
yeah.
You know, most people, if they say, read the script, so you read the script,
And it kind of like seeps in because you're
Yeah.
like, oh, they did a little different, or oh, the audience laughed at this night and not that night. It's like
right.
coming up through vaudeville or something.
Yeah.
And then most of the people that were so amazing that I told you about, they went to Santa Clara University. So I went there for undergrad. But what was funny
Right.
about that is my grandfather is Azorian,
Yes.
Azorean Portuguese from which are islands in the middle of the Atlantic,
Right,
as you know. But he tried to go to Santa Clara University, but he had an aunt who said, come on over, work on the farms by day and go to university, or whatever, go to university by day, work on the farms at night. I don't know what the plan was, but come here, you'll be able to go to university.
Right.
And he washed dishes at my university and then realized he could never go there. Like, it was just
impossible.
And so, but then his brother made a bunch of money in the tuna industry when they were doing the pole fishing with 3 guys hauling these giant tunas out of the ocean together. And he broke his ribs, you know, but he saved enough money so that his kids could go and I could go. So I wish when I graduated, like my grandfather was there, like I wish I kind of understood all that, you know? Do you ever feel that way, that like you wish you could go back in time and kind of like have the understanding that you have now at those moments?
Oh, sure. You know, a lot of times people don't really, when you're a kid, they don't tell you about their hard times. They might say later when you're a little older, oh yeah, it was hard times, you know, but they don't really give you the dirty details, you know, stuff like that.
Here's one of my favorites, because basically there's a lot of jokes about how Azorians and whalers and fishermen, they don't say a lot, especially, you know, the Portuguese grandfathers don't say a lot. So I remember saying like, well, Grandpa, how would your life be different if you were in the Azores, if you'd stayed in the Azores? And he said, well, for one thing, I'd be dead. But, you know, in fact, I'm reading a novel somebody sent me about their childhood in the Azores, actually. It was the same thing. Like, Grandpa, what was this like? What was this like? And, you know, or you know, World War I, World War II, you know, another global epidemic, you know, submarines coming up destroyed, bombings, all this kind of stuff, right? And the grandmother would say, well, we're still living it. Life isn't done yet. History isn't over, you know. So she just say that over and over and over.
Play. Go outside and play.
You know. So in a way, but I mean, I guess probably even think about your grandfather now. Like, how are you going to explain it when he's like, so?
We'll talk undoubtedly about climate and stuff and all, and because that's something we're interested in, and I know you are for sure. But you know, like, he's always going to be dealing with that, you know. That for me is something that I became aware of in the late 60s. It wasn't something I was aware of when I was 10, you know. But he's going to be aware of it his whole life. When he's my age, Arthur, it's going to be 2093, right? He's going to, whatever happens in terms of remedies or actions to try to mitigate climate change, he's going to live through all of that, you know. Hopefully, you know, and he won't be able to understand what it was like to drive a gas guzzler.
Or imagine, like,
you know?
Did you imagine that? I don't know. When I grew up, I thought if you flushed the toilet, it went away, and the garbage was disappeared.
Just went
like
away.
I don't know why. I just thought. I mean, maybe it's like middle class Silicon Valley lifestyle.
No, nobody
I don't
thought
know
about that.
But I just thought, well, and I guess even in the Azores, like they would just throw garbage in the sea.
Sure.
Because it didn't used to be a toxic nightmare to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like you just, stuff was gone.
Well,
like, I mean, it's just insane.
I grew up when everybody was smoking.
Oh yeah.
You know.
I love that because
everybody was smoking everywhere.
There's this footage when I was about to have my kid. give birth to my kid.
Yeah.
I went to my sister's godparents' place because there were bad fires in LA, so we went to the coast to get away from the fires.
Right.
And they had footage from the 60s of when right before I was born, and everybody was drinking like serious cocktails and chain smoking.
Oh yeah.
It was like,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, no wonder everyone died young.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like,
exactly. Okay, so you're out of high school now.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah,
So,
out of high school, went to Santa Clara University. That's
Yes.
right, yeah.
Now that was interesting because
With all those great people.
Yeah,
right?
but they all left.
Uh-huh.
So what I had was kind of different. Like I experienced, it was a very elite environment, and my mother and aunt were among the first women to go there. But when I was there, the priests were still saying women should have never been let in. There was a lot of great things that happened. Like I got to work with Royal Shakespeare Company actors.
Wow.
There was a wonderful Italian Commedia dell'arte master who came in,
Fantastic.
and we're right near San Francisco.
Yeah.
But my favorite thing was working with professionals from San Francisco, like Ken Grantham was a director who worked a lot with John O'Keefe as a playwright. So, but I was kind of, how do I put it? I think I was just like a little bit too young for all these amazing things that were happening. So Oscar Eustis and Tony Kushner were working together on Angels in America in San Francisco at that time.
Right.
But my favorite, I guess, one of the most important moments was when at San Jose Rep I saw a play called Execution of Justice by Emily Mann, and it was about Harvey Milk being assassinated by Dan White.
Right.
And it basically was a play that put the community on trial for the way that they had handled that situation.
Right.
And I think I was just so wowed by that. So, but in Santa Clara, it was also an era where, the AIDS epidemic was happening.
Sure.
And then we did
What year are we talking about now? 81, 2?
Yeah, this was like 83 to 87.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I'm saying is I was a little bit freaked out because a lot of these people were going to become judges, lawyers, prominent business people. And I hadn't really been in that kind of environment before, and I felt that like in general there was a lack of social education, I guess I would say, or political education. Right. And I also met...
And you'd come from this alternative kind of situation, really,
Yeah, and then I was really good friends with a woman from Costa Rica who was from El Salvador originally, and I'm still in contact with her, which is amazing. And then they had a program there where the King and Queen of Jordan sent a scholarship student, and so she'd grown up in Palestine. So at that time there was sort of that liberation theology, but there just was, people were they would say really inappropriate things about people who were facing AIDS, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I remember that I had this sort of feeling, and maybe everyone in theater has it, but I really had the feeling like here I was in a Brecht play. I was in Threepenny Opera. I played Lucy, which I absolutely loved because it was like, I love having small parts where you can prepare impeccably, and then you play cards the rest of the time or whatever, And
you're one of those actors.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't mind. I'll carry the show, but I guess I prefer Lucy. Like you make Lucy like this crazy character where people are like, "Oh my God, here comes Lucy!" Just like hit it, quit it. Maybe I shouldn't do that right by the mic, but anyways, if I did, I'm sorry. But I was like, we had these signs on stage, "Shut not your ears to misery," and Brecht is making fun of the fact that people that are begging on the streets are trying to come up with good slogans that will make people care, and there's all, and I'm like, okay, so in the theater we tend to be like, wow, we've done a show about poverty. or I was in 5th of July, which I loved. I was Shirley in 5th of July, which I loved being in that play, because I got to be in it as a freshman, and so people were really mad, but there were happened to be a lot of great parts for younger people that year, and so I got to play all these wonderful roles. And that was a fun play to do because what would happen is the two men would kiss at the beginning of the play, and then 20 people would leave, and then I would come out and do this speech about cunnilingus as a young teenager, and then then another 20% would leave, and then we were like, okay, now we have our audience for the rest of the show. Yeah, that's right. That's funny. I come back in.
Depending. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. But anyways, so it was, but again, we were sort of like, okay, we've done a show about gay rights or something. And I was like, have we? Like, what are we doing exactly? So I just wanted to do something more direct. And I knew someone, and remember, I'm in a Jesuit university, but I knew someone who ran the Women's Center, and she had worked in a domestic violence shelter, and she seemed kind of fearless. And so she had done this through something called the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and I didn't want to do the Peace Corps because I knew that the U.S. government was involved in a lot of the operations of the Peace Corps at that time. But I wanted to do something more direct, so I went to New York State and worked in a domestic violence shelter for a year. And so that was, it's really interesting because...
Where in New York State?
Troy, New York, which is a super poor town right outside of Albany.
Yes.
And they've got like third generation poverty there because they used to make paper collars for men's shirts.
Right.
And then there was no industry since, except for when Martin Scorsese shot Age of Innocence there.
Right, I saw
because
it.
there's just like, it's unbelievable gorgeous buildings that are kind of abandoned.
Yes.
But what was amazing is I was going out on calls where police wouldn't go at 22. Like they were like, no, that's too dangerous. And it would be like, and in my first week, there was a memorial to someone who was a big brother and a woman who'd been gunned down by her partner the year before. So it showed me that like, even if you're a volunteer, it's not like you're safe, right? So, So what was interesting is I was reading Rebecca Solnit's interview called Memoirs of My Non-Existence, and she talked about kind of as a woman wanting to disappear or be invisible or feeling threatened by violence. But because of theater, like you, I was like, I wasn't always comfortable being myself, but I was comfortable playing someone else.
Right.
But also I wanted to confront my fears, and try to do something about them. So it was just interesting to reflect that it seems kind of almost reckless or not me, I don't know, but it's just something about me that it's like I rather than retreating, I went.
I sort of think that's a very healthy thing. I think, too many people are afraid to come up against their fears. It's, for a lot of folks, it's just easier to just stay right here. Not gonna go there. Not gonna think about it. And that's worse. You kind of like have this thing bottled up inside you for the rest of your life. Maybe it's terrible. Yeah.
So but I couldn't really last long not doing theater. So before you knew it, it's like when they found out I had theater skills. So they were like, we're having a rally. Would you direct some people in some monologues? And I was like, okay. And then, I was hanging around the dance therapist. And then I went to the local repertory company. And before you knew it, I was running like a women's playwright festival and stuff. So I think I lasted like 2 months with my like...
So there you are in Troy, but you, instead of say, going down to New York or whatever, you came back, right?
Yeah, well, that was kind of wild because I met Bill before I went to Troy.
Okay. Now, how did you... Okay, so tell us a little bit about this.
Well, usually I don't tell it, but now I guess I'm telling everybody.
Yeah.
But my grandmother would take us... My grandmother took my family on a cruise to Alaska, and Bill was playing trumpet on the cruise and going to China.
Whoa, shipboard romance.
Yeah.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
So I was like, I'm not dating. I'm going to work at a domestic violence shelter or whatever. And then there's like Northern Lights, this amazing, sexy trumpet player. There's like shooting stars. I felt like I was being smashed over the head with a frying pan. Like, isn't this romantic?
Yeah.
And then,
it is.
Yeah.
It's fabulous.
It was fabulous. And then he would send me like 40-page letters when I was working in the domestic violence shelter.
Whoa.
So because I didn't have as much time to write, I wasn't on a ship, right? I had to mail him like books and stuff. Right? Yeah. So our first date was in Alaska, and then while I was there, the thing about the Jesuit Volunteer Corps that was amazing, and it's kind of funny because I told them I was an ex-Catholic at the time, but they still accepted this. But what was cool is that I was all of a sudden, like I was in a university, and that particular generation in that university was not very politically minded, as I mentioned, at least.
Right.
And then all of a sudden I was around 80 people who were 22, and rather than go make money or whatever, they were all saying, okay, I want to do something. So I knew people working in soup kitchens, helping babies that were born with AIDS, helping with poverty. Yeah, and it wasn't very religious, like I would say. We had like silent retreats. But we got to go all over the Northeast visiting people that lived in Boston, Brooklyn, and then, go work in a soup kitchen in Brooklyn. And so
Fabulous experience, actually. You
Yeah.
know? I mean, you
Yeah.
learn a ton.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe some uncomfortable situations and stuff,
And there was a man who was being beaten by his wife, and their kids are being beaten by the wife. But if you think about it, most people are like, why doesn't this person facing violence leave?
Yeah.
They go, why don't they leave?
Yeah.
Well, if you think about it, would you give up your home, all your stuff, your job, your whole community? In some cases, it was communities that were like, we have to ostracize you, even though we know this person is abusing you and is mentally ill, and because people in our community don't ever leave a marriage or whatever.
Yeah.
But they had the courage to do that. So
Yeah.
I feel like that courage has, and thinking about those people, my whole life has been a great gift.
Yeah.
But I don't usually talk about it, so
Well,
it's cool that
talk
you
about
like,
anything you want to.
you like
Today, you could talk about anything.
You're good at.
Doesn't matter.
Well, the pandemic's interesting too, because we end up reflecting on like early memories, why you did
Suppose
stuff.
I died next month. You it really does call into a lot of questions. I'm very glad we started doing these interviews, because I'd rather do these meet somebody and talk to them, and and find out what they're all about. Take a little refreshment break. We're back.
Okay, we're back. It was really interesting what you were
break.
saying about the pandemic changing. It's really fascinating. Well, I have a research assistant from Rio de Janeiro right now at Douglas College, and I'm very privileged to have this research assistant. It's amazing. I've never had a research assistant before. There's been weeks where she's had 2 close colleagues die of COVID, right? So it's, and then it depends on where in the world you are. Like my friend had to flee Brooklyn, and a significant part of her neighborhood's now dead. So it's like where you were at what time in the pandemic, or everybody's situation has. Texas, I was working with someone in Austin, Texas during the pandemic, or for a big portion of the pandemic, and they lost their, like you're trying to work on just a little theater piece with this person, and then all of a sudden they lose all their power. They're chopping wood, cooking food in the fireplace. They're Latinx. They're surrounded by Trump supporters, and Trump has, they just stormed the U.S. Capitol, and they are fear that their capital is going to be stormed, and they don't know if they should flee the country and go back to Mexico. It's like from week to week, this is what,
uncertainty.
Yeah.
Really high uncertainty, a lot of anxiety, fear.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah. I sometimes ask my students, what are stories for?
Uh-huh.
And then we make like a whole wall of what stories are for. Because, some cultures have beliefs that they're to pass on wisdom from generation to generation, for example. But in our culture, we kind of buy and sell stories, right? Mm-hmm. And then as actors, we kind of, you try to be as interchangeable. Like, I can be in anything. We're trying to sell our stories. And so we're, like, I think you were saying, like, we're pushing certain boulders up hills and with certain mindsets. So it's kind of interesting to take a pause because, like you say, you go, why? What was I doing?
Yeah.
What am I doing this story for? I found that was hard. I was like, well, there is no theater, so why am I writing plays?
Why am I writing this play?
Playwrights are very bad because playwrights ask questions back. Like we're apparently, I heard from someone at the LA Times they're the worst people to interview because we ask questions.
Yeah, like they're trying to find out stuff. Yeah, right, to use in their next play.
Yeah, I guess so. But playwrights are bad interviews.
That's okay.
Yeah, I just should have warned you.
It doesn't matter. There is no bad interview in
No,
this
but
show.
of course.
Okay, so you meet Bill, the fabulous romantic trip to Alaska.
Trumpet player, and we have trumpet in the
there's
park.
a trumpet in the background.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Perfect.
We can hear that. So then what happened? Okay, so now the boat pulls into the dock. You got to go home with your grandmother. You know?
I was going to New York to work in a domestic violence shelter, and he was going to China. So I thought that we were a bit doomed.
That was it.
Yeah, but we kept writing, and then our next date was in Montreal because his sextet won the Alcan Jazz Festival and competed in Montreal. So I had this pass to see everything at the Montreal Jazz Festival. I was invité to Bill Clark.
Yeah.
And then Jacques DeJohnette was playing.
Fabulous.
In Vancouver at that time, there was less economic pressure, so he knew people running art galleries, doing figurative art. Everybody was deeply into their music careers. He was a member of the Vancouver Ensemble of Jazz Improvisation.
Yeah.
That was run by Hugh Fraser, and and Chris Mooney, who's a writer who's now moved to Paris, was so everybody was writers, visual artists.
The community was hopping.
Yeah, you remember. Well, you were part of that where it was what were people living in the Green Thumb House and doing shows at the Vancouver?
Yeah.
It seems almost unimaginable. Like you could just the thing in New York. It's the same. Like people used to all be able to live in Manhattan, but now everyone has to have an hour commute to go home. So you don't have the same thing. Well, like you and Susie being quarantined together, you wrote a play, so people would do that kind of thing, interact outside of work or whatever. But now it's got to catch the train or. Here, so it was really beautiful, and I was so impressed. So then we just kept...
Had you ever been, except for getting on the boat to go to Alaska, had you ever been up here before?
No, but here, this is an interesting thing, if we're going to follow my chronology. After the domestic violence shelter, I had worked with an amazing director, Bill Peters, who is married to an amazing actor and director and teacher, Sarah Albertson. They came in as guests at Santa Clara, and I just really hit it off with them. I babysat their son. They both were graduates of Yale School of Drama, and he ran the directing program at San Francisco State. Right. And they were like, you're not really just an actor. Like, we can tell you kind of want to, I wanted to know everything. I wanted to know how lights, everything, sound. I was interested in all of it. Whereas actors aren't always interested in props. Not always, but I was interested in everything. And so they were like, well, maybe you're a director. So I went and I studied directing with him for a year, and they were like, why don't you stay with him for a year, and then we could help you get into a graduate school. But instead, I came up here, and I was offered some theater companies to run as artistic director.
Okay.
So I just kind of started, I started here as a director. And,
Good.
And then my whole thing
And it all coalesced. You thought, okay.
Yeah.
Bill's got that trumpet.
Yeah. Well,
he was this gig.
It was crazy then. He made really, people used to make very good money as doing live trumpet. And so he was right on the cusp of that ending.
You didn't need as much money. Now it's like you need more money, Well, after a while, these things smack you in the face.
And they still, but that doesn't mean,
it doesn't matter how, and I don't want to say starry-eyed, but, you become obsessed with if you're an artist, you often tend to become obsessed with your art, and you don't notice, these other competing realities, and then, suddenly, you wake up and you're 60, and you go like, oh my God.
No, it's it's a harsh reckoning. And what to kind of compound it, growing up in Silicon Valley, I mean, think about that.
Oh yeah.
Like basically, you could invent anything.
Yeah.
Like you could invent a dating app, which is Facebook, right? Yeah. And become one of the richest people in the world. So like everybody acts like that. Like, oh, if you just invent something cool, so you'll be rich. So I actually had some of my parents' friends come to my play at Cal Arts. I wrote a play with being mentored by Susan Laurie Parks, and they were just kind of like, "Why aren't you rich? You invented something cool," and you're just like, No, it actually outside of Silicon.
We don't get rich. It's those other people that get rich. Yeah. Yeah. We're not the rich people.
But whereas like Bill's family, you know, was much more like you're going to have to get a job and you know, you should be a school teacher. And so I it's very strange to come from Silicon Valley because it's almost like if you say, well, it's going to be a real problem if you don't have bees. It's like you're being a horrible pessimist. Yeah. It's like, well, someone can invent something.
Let's come up now. Okay, so boom, you guys get together, you get married, life in Vancouver, and then you really become a writer, pretty much, eh?
Well, what was interesting though is mostly a director and then an actor, but there were too many stories missing from our stages. Was what I felt like. Yes. There's a lot of stories that aren't here. Yeah. And
still the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And so at least, so it really came from me being female that I was just like, there's too few female. And also Jim Reber, he told me to be a playwright when I was mentored by him at San Jose Rep. And I was like, I was terrified. Like at Santa Clara, there was a playwriting class. And I said, well, what do you do in that playwriting class? And they said, well, you write a play. And I said, a whole play? Forget it. Like, and I just was like, no.
Too many pages.
Well, it was just too intimidating because if you think, I don't know, I love theater so much that the idea of, I don't know, being the creator of this world or the person inspiring this world, it was too daunting. Like, I didn't really see that that's what I was already doing when I was working with those puppets as a kid, or it just seemed way too daunting. And so, but when I was up here, I started noticing like, no, I want there to be this story and this story. Like at Santa Clara, there was a story about Isabel Andreini ran a commedia dell'arte troupe that was captured by terrorists that managed to overthrow the French government. Okay. So in theater school, that I was like, what? What is this footnote? What the hell? A woman ran a theater company in the 16th century and they overthrew the government because why did they overthrow the government? And even when I would ask...
Never heard that story before,
Yeah. And then even when I asked people in France about it, they were like, it was about the story of Henri III. And I said, well, yeah, it was Henri III. And they go, there is no Henri III. And I said, yes, there is. They were like, there's Henri II and Henri III, a fourth, but no Henri III. And I was like, why? And so then they looked it up in their French encyclopedia, and Henri III is the most incompetent king in French history. Right, yeah. But what happened is he loved theater, so he gave the terrorists whatever they wanted and let all the Protestants out of jail, and it managed to overthrow his government.
There's a real lesson there, I think.
Don't love theater too much.
Yeah.
But I mean, still, it's like one of those stories that's left out, and there are tons of them where you're just like, why are we doing the same story again when there's so many that we've never heard? Yeah. So I started writing those plays in the gaps between acting and directing, and then I decided kind of as a hoot to apply for graduate school, and then I got a full scholarship to study with Paula Vogel and a full scholarship to study with Susan Lori Parks, and so I had to just decide, and it was a very hard decision, but because I love Paula Vogel's writing as well. But yeah, Susan Lori Parks mentored me for 3 years in playwriting, so that was a big life changer. You know, she's kind of like almost like a superstar athlete because she's so disciplined. It's almost like she puts you on a track, a writing track. So we had to read all the works of Shakespeare in the first year. We had to come up with 600 ideas for plays. We wrote 6 plays, but like in the first year we wrote 3 plays, and then we did like a lazy Susan thing where you would write first drafts of these plays and then come back to them. And so and then rewrite them. So she's a very disciplined writer, but also a very open writer. So she kind of teaches you to do both, and that was just perfect for me. And I adore her writing, and she's also very interested in what she called the great whole of history, all the history that's not told, especially from the African American female perspective. Yeah. So, she was a great.
Sounds like a pretty fabulous grad school education, you know. So when did the New Mexico thing happen and all that? I mean, you guys get married, all that.
Well, after grad school in LA, we didn't really find enough work in LA right away because it's really kind of intern town. Like you can be an intern here for free, but we had a
and
little.
If you get lucky, you'll be a star.
Yeah. And we had a little baby, so we came back here for 2 years, and I founded the Elite Playwriting program at the Arts Club because I just thought,
excellent.
You know, I was afraid to be a writer when I told you how I was afraid to be a writer when I was in my 20s. So I thought, well, what if I gave everything I've learned in grad school to young writers, and what if these young writers were really like Vancouver stages are not the same. The racial makeup of Vancouver stages are not the same as the city.
Yeah.
And so if I had all these like wonderful writers and gave them all the stuff that I learned from great mentors like Alice Twan, Brian Freeman, Luis Alfaro, Susan Laurie Parks, and just gave them all that I could at like 16, and they're 16 years old, and see what they do. And it's amazing. Like some of them are now leading programs at the Vanny's Cultural Center, producers, or it's just really amazing to see people that came up through that program. But as I was doing that, I applied for and got a job at the University of New Mexico, to run their graduate playwriting program, and one of the largest new play festivals in the Southwest as artistic director. So I was there for 5 years. And what was amazing, well, have you been to New Mexico?
Oh, yeah.
We had a number of nationally award-winning playwrights that were Latinx and Indigenous. And I said that because of being in New Mexico, we were uniquely able to support students like that. Like one of the first things I did is the students were complaining, like, people can't speak Spanish, there's no one who's brown in any of these plays, there's no one Indigenous, and so... What I did was created a program where I raised the money to bring in prominent Indigenous directors, whatever your network was. So if you could identify it yourself, who you wanted to work with. So it could be female directors, experimental directors, whatever. So I brought in those directors, and then people around the country noticed, like, hey, this is amazing. So many players graduate from MFA programs, and it's like they fall into a pit. But what you've done is like you created a bridge to the professional world. Yeah. So some of my students immediately got commissions.
Yeah, that's great.
So it was really an honor, because what happened is sometimes you'd have an Indigenous actor in a play by an Indigenous writer and an Indigenous director, and they'd say, "I see a place for me." Yeah. And they became majors, and often there were no Latinx or Indigenous or people of color in the acting program, So I started to see, like I called it like, it's like positive feedback loops, kind of, I would call it. Like, so you'd start to have, because we have so many negative ones, like all the holes in history, all the like, there's no place for me here kind of thing. So I really, it was a real privilege, and a lot of the students won like national awards from the Kennedy Center.
Yeah, bravo.
It was a great.
Yeah, excellent.
It was beautiful. And then my kid wanted to go to Spanish immersion, so they had a perfect Chihuahuense accent. And so when all this stuff was happening in terms of racism in Arizona that was so scary, my kid is like 8 years old and is like, I'm going to speak Spanish the whole time in Arizona. It was interesting because they were very blonde and blue-eyed at that point, and people would just be terrified by a fluent speed. I was kind of like...
That's great.
But I mean, of course, my students were scared to even go into that state sometimes. So it was, Well, we saw things got a lot worse, obviously, after we left. But basically, what happened was I got a commission to write a play at Pomona College in right outside Los Angeles, and they wanted me to write an environmental play. And at that time, I think you'll find this funny, I was between jobs, so I was like, I think maybe I could try to be an environmental reporter. So the Vancouver Observer was like, we think so too. We'll pay you $100 to write a piece. We'll see how you do. Right. So what happened was I was a terrible reporter because reporters are supposed to like have a lot of conviction, right? And just kind of be like, we should expose this fact about you. Let's talk to you about this and write it. And, they're very, playwrights are just don't have the kind of Woodward and
Shark-like.
Bernstein, the truth must be told kind of thing. We have a truth must be told side, but what I'm saying is playwrights see many, many sides of things, right?
Right. They see more sides.
They see a lot of sides. Yes.
You're writing something more with more contending voices in it when you're a playwright, when you see the world like that.
Well, and to be fair to myself, what happened was I had said, I think it'd be really interesting to report on individual places up north. Because they were the Vancouver Observer then, and they're a great paper, doing a lot of environmental reporting. And I was saying that so many people in the Lower Mainland have a connection to somewhere like Kitimat, and but we don't report specifically on Kitimat. Or someone was doing some reporting on the Queen Charlotte's already, and I was like, so we want to know what's happening in terms of the environment. And from being an actor, touring around, we're connected to these other places. So I said, I'd like to write something about Kitimat. And they were like, well, no one's going to talk to you in Kitimat because they don't talk to people. And I said, well, they'll talk to me because they're all Azorean Portuguese. And that's what I am. So they'll talk to me. So, or 50% are Azorean Portuguese. So then what happened is I started researching. It was all in the middle of they were putting the Enbridge, wanting to put the Enbridge oil pipeline in. And what happened was Kitimat became the only city in all of North America to vote on whether or not they wanted the pipeline to come. So Enbridge put an enormous amount of money in advertising and advertised across the province to sway people towards this project. Really, and it's a very small municipality. But the BBC in Britain came, people from across the United States came, people, Nobel Prize winners came to talk to them, people who've been through the Exxon Valdez spill came to talk to them, Kalamazoo oil spill, everybody was coming to Kitimat. So it wasn't maybe just that I was a bad reporter, it was just that I wanted to ask intelligent questions, and they were just under a tsunami of paperwork around this project, and also the National Energy Board had done all these interviews with people. So I ended up I got called to write an environmental play, and I looked down at all this stuff, and I went, I think it's a play, not an article. So I ended up writing a play in the middle of this huge fight over whether or not they wanted an oil pipeline to come. And then I was a member of Theatre Without Borders at that point, and they said, well, we want to shift from peace building to climate change. So, Elaine, what should we do? And I said, I don't know. I've only written one environmental play. and they said, let's get some people together, including Chantal Bilodeau was writing a cycle of environmental plays called the Arctic Cycle. She's writing about every country that is
bordered.
And so I said, Chantal, you're committed. You're already in this field. What does the field need? And she says more people to write about the climate. We called it climate change at that point, around 2014, 2015. We called it. But she said no one's writing about it because most theaters are funded heavily by gas and oil.
Sure.
The New Play Festival in Canada was the Enbridge Festival of New Plays, which is an oil company. BAM has, So most theaters can't really
speak up.
So I said, well, let's do a climate change theater action. And what that was is Carrie Dedsivich, another colleague of mine, every time something really that requires some kind of response in the United States would happen, she would ask a group of playwrights to write plays for free that could be then done by the community or people internationally. So we wrote about the largest mass shooting in U.S. history at the Pulse nightclub. We wrote about, at that time, there's worse now, but we wrote about Sandy Hook so that people could use them as fundraisers.
Yes, exactly.
So we took those two ideas and carried out, and Chantal and I founded this theater action. So we worked pretty tirelessly for a year for free, just asking everyone we knew to be part of it. And so we had 50 playwrights on every continent, and it was in response to the Paris climate change talks, and we ran them at the same time, and they were just done all over the world, these plays, and it gave people a chance to talk about it. You were part of one of the first ones that we did at the...
I really enjoyed that. I really did enjoy it. At first I enjoyed it because it was a whole bunch of really great people involved.
Yeah.
You know, it really was. And then the piece I did by Barker. Yeah.
No, you had a really famous playwright. You did a beautiful job of that.
Really,
about like, he was a person in Hollywood who was quite well-to-do that suddenly had no running water. And
something's wrong up here in the Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
You know.
But it was interesting because people hadn't been writing about the climate crisis, and then at that time it was like, who are the characters?
Yeah.
It's too big. We can't grapple with it. And now, of course, sadly, it's like changed. Like there's so much we could write.
Oh, yeah.
I was a Fulbright scholar in 2019, before this. So I got to go to the Azores for 3 months, which are my ancestral islands, and work on 2 new plays. So during the pandemic, I actually kept on working on those plays because something that I found very concerning is, I'm not sure exactly how to put it, but the rise of Islamophobia in Canada, like just beating up of people wearing burqas, the laws in Quebec around the hijab, you know, and unfortunately I feel, and I've read some Middle Eastern feminists who've written very well about this. I mean, it really is tired to, Barbara Bush was like, we've got to go save these women wearing the hijab and the burqa, and it's very polarizing. It's like a lot of women from the West look at women who who cover their head as oppressed. And some of that might might have validity.
Yes.
You know, anything that you're required to wear, it could be very oppressive.
Yeah, you're required to wear it.
Yeah. and I'm not trying to downplay that, but it's also like the hysteria among some Western feminists. Like it's interesting because Western feminists are also required to wear things, and it's very divisive among women.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So it happened to be that my female ancestors wore a Portuguese form of the burqa for like 300, 400 years.
Yeah.
That's really got a huge hood.
Right.
And so I wanted to interview women about it.
Right.
Contemporary women about it, you know, because people are still making them for like carnival, getting little kids to make them.
Yeah.
They're considered a tourist symbol of the Azores, you know, and women have all these different opinions about them. And so I was on strange quests, like who is the last woman to wear one? And I had a photograph of her, and people have been searching for her identity for 10 years, and I found her identity, interviewed her grandson in Lisbon.
Cool.
You know. So anyway, that's my latest play, and then I was making little films of it.
So where are we going to see it? Where's it going to get done?
Where's it going to get
done there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it going to have a premiere in the Azores, Portugal?
Because one of the things I really like is, you know, your stuff has been done like all over the world. I mean, you did stuff in Panama. I mean, I think that must be fun, eh?
Yeah, it is. Like, I don't know. I felt like the Indiana Jones of like playwriting sometimes because when I was about to go give a lecture at University of New Mexico, and I looked down at my shoes and they were falling apart because I worn them in the monsoons of Panama, and I was like, oh my God, that sounds like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in classroom.
It was a raggedy old passport, you know. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, but I wouldn't trade it, but it's a very unusual situation. Like I was just looking in traditional places to do my plays. I honestly was. But like one of my plays is called Jane Austen Action Figure.
Yes.
And it was first done in Panama City as Jane Austen Figura de Acción in Spanish, you know? I was just like, what? You know?
Wait a second.
But it was amazing.
No, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That really is wonderful. You're going to keep doing all that.
Yeah.
You're not going to stop, right?
No, I don't think so.
No, I don't think you're going to stop. You don't seem like somebody who's going to stop.
You know, can't all do everything as one person with the things that you see that we have to deal with in our era. And as you know, the punchline to all of this is that there is nothing else but the climate crisis now.
Well, if you don't fix that, none of the other issues are going to get solved. I mean, you know, if you can fix the climate, then you might have some time, you know, to do everything else. But if you don't, you know, whoopee. You know, suppose you have justice for somebody in the Azores, great, and it'll all be gone.
Underwater.
Yeah,
or hurricanes.
Fix the climate and then, fix everything else.
Well, it's just become the issue that affects all the issues, and also things are accelerating, and a lot of us just really have no idea, and I was that way too. We have no idea about certain things, and we're not supposed to. So you have to spend a bunch of time figuring it out. Like, what are the impacts of flying? What are the impact? Why is it we can get free range eggs but not free range milk? Like, you actually have to dig into where does our trash go? Go to see the dump. It's, and average people have so much difficulty just getting through the day. Yeah. Especially now that it's it's difficult to really, we're not really supposed to know how bad it is. And how, but we're starting to know, especially here in British Columbia. So I guess my dream is that we'll be able to take care of this earth, and that we'll be able to look at some of the things that we inherited as ideas, like trash just goes away. We haven't really looked at colonialism. You were sort of hinting at it, but the forensic evidence of finding those children really brings home, it's so terrible, and it really brings home that all of the Latin America, Central America, and North America were colonized brutally, and that anywhere you live is stolen land, and that but in a way, with reckoning with all of these things, there's real beauty, the recognizing that this tree, we're related to this tree, and I know tree huggers have been made fun of, but books come from trees. We have this relationship with everything around us, and all the people around us, like you doing this show and saying, I'm going to switch things because I want, we miss being together and conversations and the beauty of those things. So I think we're not going to solve it by recycling, and we end up, I think, a lot of citizens like us perhaps end up spending a majority of our energy on this kind of ineffective zone, recycling, even reduce, reuse, recycling. We're spending all this time and trying to figure out how to live without plastic rather than protesting the makers of plastic. So it's something's got to change in how we're thinking, because China wanted to become more green and is actually doing many, many effective things because those decisions are coming top down from the government. So like you say, so it's
So.
But I really learned a lot from the climate change theater plays, because one of the most haunting, there's some really haunting ones from Jordan, from Africa, where you really, that just stay with me forever. In fact, one of the ones is You Are Not Alone. It's by a beautiful writer from Kenya. And she writes, what if we could get all these leaders together and talk to them like people, and the people that are creating the majority of climate change, climate crisis.
Have them down to the beach house in this hurricane season. Lock the door.
Lock the door. Right. I know. I think storytelling is one of the most powerful things we have, and climate scientists are please help us. The word's not out, and you are storytellers. People don't understand, and they don't know how to grapple with it. So please help us. So that would be my dream, to help them. So
that's good.
Okay.
That's great. Yeah.